Welcome to A Photographer's Life, the channel that takes you behind the curtain into the world of professional architectural photography. Join us now for an episode with one of America's premier architectural photographers. Today's broadcast comes from a recent interview with up-and-coming American architectural photographer Kyle Wege. Today's interview was conducted by AIAP Director Alan Blakely. We hope you enjoy the show. If you do, please let us know by liking this episode and subscribing to this channel. Now, on with the show.
We're happy to welcome you to this AIAP podcast interview. And today we're speaking with Kyle Wege of Madison, Wisconsin. Kyle's a member of AIAP and a commercial and architectural photographer, and we're anxious to get to know more about him. Welcome, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Glad to be here.
Tell me just a little bit about where you got your introduction to photography and kind of what was the thing that sparked your interest in being a photographer.
Sure. So I got into photography when I was a young kid. My dad was a hobbyist photographer.
Oh, okay.
So my first memories of photography are us out in our backyard at night with glow sticks, doing long exposures, creating
Cool.
people out of nothing and just fun stuff like that. So I used his camera for a while. He had a Canon SLR, film camera, and shot on that for a little bit. And then when I was in middle school, I purchased a Nikon FM10
Okay.
and started just shooting on that as much as I could. Just a lot of landscapes and nature and that kind of thing, just walking around. And then when I got into high school, it was still a passion of mine. And so I took the photography class there, which was really fun. It was a half a semester or whatever. And it went really well. The teacher said, "Hey, you seem like you've got, kind of a knack for this. Do you want to do like an independent study and we'll keep this class going?" And I said, "Yeah, for sure." So I did another year of that. And then he, again, was liking what I was doing and kind of asked me to help contribute a little more to the classes. And so I helped do some development because we had a black and white dark room at our school.
Nice.
And so we did some of that. Our field trips and stuff, I would help other kids just get their settings right and kind of help them if they had any questions. So, the passion was there early. I never honestly thought I'd do it for a living. So I was like, either you shoot weddings or you shoot for National Geographic.
Yeah,
and those
right.
were the two avenues that I saw. And I never really thought either of those was going to be something for me. So I actually went to school for audio engineering in Madison and planned on, doing live music or music recording in studio, that kind of thing. I'm a musician as well. So that tended not to really produce much work for me because I didn't want to move to Nashville or LA or any place like that. I kind of liked being here in the Midwest. And so, eventually it just kind of moved into being my main role. I never put a camera down, and I had friends and family who were graduating high school and who were getting married, and so I just kind of shot a couple of things here and there. And then a gentleman who used to work with my dad, they were police officers. He left to be a photographer, went the commercial route, and he was doing great things all around the country. And so he had a lighting course that I took, I don't know, maybe 12 years ago or something like that. It just seemed really interesting, was kind of fun. And from that point, I realized, commercial photography.
Yeah.
This is what I care about. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Like, this is really fun. You can be creative and, there's actually budgets and, new people are bringing you in and you get to do cool marketing stuff. So that was kind of where I started. So I started my business, Crimson Sun Studios, almost exactly 10 years ago. And I was shooting all sorts of stuff. I was doing some architecture, real estate, events, food, product, headshots, lifestyle, everything that I could think of. And just over the years, it's been narrowing itself more and more into architecture. And that's just the thing that I feel I like the most. My skill set, I think, drives most into that. I had done a lot of compositing in my early years just because I thought it was really fun trying to make surreal scenes and shoot a bunch of different pieces in studio or wherever I was and then bring them all together in post-production. And I feel like architecture can be a lot of that if you're blending models and if you're doing lighting of different scenarios and you're trying to fix color cast between windows and interior lighting and stuff like that. It's all that same kind of skill set. So
that's interesting. That's really true. so you started out, I mean, as a commercial photographer, you didn't ever go the route of the retail photography situation. And so who are your clients when you first started out as far as commercial clients? Did you work with ad agencies, or where did your business come from?
Um, yeah, so most of it, like right when I started my business, I joined a weekly networking group.
Oh, okay.
Back in the day, it was BNI for
Hmm.
this particular group, and they're, a national, international kind of organization that builds networking chapters all around.
Yeah.
So that was a good initial placement for me because in
Hmm.
that group there was, maybe 20 other professionals, and I was the only photographer. And
Okay.
so most of my work was direct to client, so they would have needs to photograph their team, or they
Mm.
would want, some shots of their building inside, or they wanted, some shots of their menu if it was a restaurant there, or they would have connections to other people that they
Hmm.
knew that were looking for photography. And that was really how I started to grow my client base and my
Mm.
portfolio. And then from there, it was just, persistently moving forward and trying to build relationships in my local market.
Hmm.
I've done some work with agencies, but the vast majority of what I've done is direct to client.
Okay. Yeah, that I mean, that whole business model has changed pretty dramatically since I started out as a commercial photographer. And when I started out, it was all agency work. Yeah, like, you didn't ever really work directly with any clients. It was all through agencies.
Yeah.
But things have changed fairly dramatically, and it's interesting that that's at the time when you jumped in, and you're able to make you go things as a commercial photographer, because like you said, that most people don't think of photography as being commercial photography. They see these pictures every day in magazines and wherever else, but they don't realize that somebody actually gets paid to shoot those. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. So it sounds like you had to develop a pretty broad skill set at the get-go, uh, just because of the variety of clientele that you were shooting for.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's accurate. I mean, my interest in photography, it stems from the base level of visual creation,
Hmm.
so just understanding composition, understanding storytelling, understanding lighting and how that affects, I mean, all of those things um, aid in the creation of any type of imagery, no matter what you're trying to do. So for me, it's really fun to have the challenge of changing and moving through and having different things that happen. Because then, you're kind of trying to understand, what does the client want? What are we trying to
Yeah.
produce here? Who's going to see these, and what is the influence? Why does it matter? And from there, just to challenge yourself to create the most visually interesting and cool thing possible that, checks that box and marks the
Hmm.
goal and gets them to their marketing needs that they want. So nowadays niche still into architecture. I'm doing still plenty of things with those same clients, doing video and doing
Hmm.
lifestyle and doing drone headshots,
Okay.
time lapse, all that kind of stuff. So it's all still different, but in terms of who I'm serving, I'm trying to narrow that down just to
Okay.
AEC.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, you described a process there that you kind of went through rather quickly, but um, I think most photographers, in order to get to be professional, have to go through that. But a lot of them never understand that process where, and you described, that you're seeing what the client needs and try to create something that's meaningful for them and their clientele and their marketing purposes. But then you're also trying to contribute something that's yours, and raise that up a level. You're not just documenting a building. You want to give them something that's artistic, and there's a value added situation there. And um, to me, that's the key to being successful, is
Yeah.
is understanding that. I early on, I worked with a photographer, and he was doing work mainly with ad agencies, um, and I only assisted him just a couple times. But one of the things he did is, after the client would leave, then he would pour over communication arts magazines and all kinds of other things, trying to get something that would spark an idea so that he could do something that was beyond what the client had asked for or expected or really needed, but to kind of push it to another level. And that
Mhm.
became his brand. And that's kind of always stuck with me. And that's exactly what you describe in that process. And so, yeah, I think that was really key. And I just wanted to, just rewind a little bit and talk about that. Let's just take a quick detour. You talked about audio engineering, and I have yet to interview anybody that's a member of AIAP who was not also a musician, and not and
Interesting.
also not, a fairly serious musician.
Yeah.
It's not just I do it just for fun kind of thing. It's I've done it and could make a living at it, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So I'm interested to hear a little bit about that and how you got into audio engineering. And Madison's not really a recording hub, but you're not far from Chicago, and there's a lot going on there. And
Yeah.
but you didn't want to go that route. What was the determining factor that tipped it towards photography for you?
Um, well, mostly my interest in audio stemmed from being a musician in high school and playing a lot in
Okay.
bands there. And honestly, just being a real terrible student and not getting into any other colleges. And I submitted to a whole bunch of places, and Madison Media Institute, which is no longer a school for many
Mm,
reasons. That was one of like two places that I got in. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, I'll just go there and learn about music. And there I was a much better student. I placed, towards the top of the class, close to a 4.0 for that.
yeah,
But it's like,
fit.
whatever you care about, you're going to put your passion into. And
Yeah.
general studies in high school, I didn't really care about. So,
Mm,
so that was the initial drive. And I probably would have gone straight into photography if I would have realized what commercial photography was, and if I would have just started, um, you know, perusing photographers who I could assist. If
okay.
somebody would have told me like, hey, this is something you could do and you can be self-employed doing this
Hmm.
and you don't even have to go to school, like schooling doesn't really matter that much,
Hmm.
especially in the days of YouTube and digital and, accessible stuff online. The most valuable thing you can do, in my opinion, is go and assist with a photographer and, just get that on-site kind of knowledge, which I was able to do,
Mm,
earlier in my career. I assisted with
okay.
two photographers here in Madison for a number of years, and
Mm,
those guys are awesome, and I highly respect them. And they do great work, and that was part of the transition. Then was
yeah.
just seeing what that looks like full time.
Well, I think there's some interesting parallels between music business and commercial photography in that, like you said, you can learn so much in school, but you really need to go be with people who do it really well. And
Mhm.
it's not my experience has been it's not something that you ever can learn in school, and um, it's just not you don't teach it's not taught that way. I know a lot of fine artists, and um, I don't know any of them that have a BFA, in oil painting or anything like that. And um, it's just something that you seem to have an affinity for, and I think photography fits into that category really well. And the fact that you're a creative person means that you've got all these other outlets, in music and things like this. I understand you play bass. Is that
Yeah.
your bass player?
Yep, bass player, and normally I have it out here in my office, but we had band practice a couple of days ago, and I haven't yet taken it back out of its case. So
That's cool.
yeah,
Um, yeah, if I didn't have my background softened, you'd see a B3 and a Fender Rhodes, and
nice,
anyway, on and on and on. Yeah,
cool.
that's what I don't do for a living, but what I still do. But yeah, I think you need those creative outlets, and it's not always about making money. You still hang on to it, and obviously you still enjoy it.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think creative pursuits outside of whatever it is you're doing for a
mhm,
living, like if you do a creative pursuit for a living, doing other things can inform and change how you do every
def,
other thing. I mean,
abs-
I play basketball, I do other things. We go camping and we're hiking
mhm,
and just, all of those types of things I feel can influence your work and your vision and what you see and how you tell stories and just what you're interested in. Some people think that like if I want to be a better photographer, like I just need to, learn my camera and learn my gear, which is obviously necessary. You need to understand how to use your tools, but there gets to a certain point of diminishing returns where you really got to step outside of that and
mhm,
then ask yourself, like, why? Why do I even do this? What's the point? Like,
yeah,
why am I, why me? Why would anybody work with me? What can I do differently?
yeah. That's um, that's pretty profound philosophy. I appreciate that. These are things that you don't get taught in school, and um, I don't know. All creative people seem to be like this, and non-creative people who will watch this will have no idea what we're talking about. So that's
Yeah.
okay. Um, for a number of years, I was on the advisory board for a photography school that's no longer in existence, and um, that was the hardest thing for me to reconcile. Was I kind of wanted photographers to learn everything but photography as part of their education.
Yeah.
Anybody can learn the menu on a Canon camera or something like that, but it's all these other things that inform your visual decisions that come from other places that have nothing whatever to do with photography. So
Yeah.
interesting that you
Absolutely.
would bring that up. So um, are you working as a sole proprietor these days, or what's your business model right now?
Yeah. So, it's pretty much just me in the business. I started it as an LLC,
Okay.
single member LLC.
Hmm.
Just at the end of last year, we
Okay.
transitioned to an S corp. So now
Oh,
that's
okay.
the case moving forward, which is cool. Trying to set up payroll and get all that kind of stuff at
Hmm.
the end of the year. In retrospect, for 2023 has been a headache, and I got to thank my CPA and my accountant for being awesome and um, holding my hand through that process because you
Yeah.
know I am not an accountant, man. I am definitely a
Uh,
photographer. A
That's
pain in the
and
ass.
that's valuable information for photographers or anybody in business for that matter. That if you're, a small business person, you really have to rely on those resources
Yeah,
and uh and understand that people there are people smarter than you. you
yeah,
know, I I just have to admit that I can't do those kinds of things, and I'd rather rely on somebody who knows how to do it right and saves me a huge tax headache in the end. So
yeah.
uh,
Especially when there's legality issues. If we're
oh,
talking about
absolutely. Yeah.
like paying your taxes on time or what you're owing to the IRS, you don't want them on your back. If you'd ever get audited or something, it's nice to have those ducks in a row or somebody you can turn to. Even in contracts or anything else, it's like just work with
Yeah.
professionals. Try to make those connections when you can. I mentioned earlier that I was in a networking group. I'm still in that group, and I've been in
Hmm.
there for nearly 10 years.
Hmm.
I've made so many professional connections there. My
Yeah.
CPA is from that group. My
Okay.
insurance guy is in that
Mm.
group. I know writers and graphic designers who have been in that group, mortgage lenders and real estate
Oh,
agents
okay.
who have all helped me. And there's just so much. If you're going to be in business for yourself, I would highly recommend joining something like that, whatever is local to you,
Yeah.
and just embed yourself into the community because there's people who can help, and you're going to build great relationships of folks
Hmm.
that you can just text, like my insurance guy, like he and I are friends, and I can just text
Yeah.
him or call him at any time and he can tell me what's up, and I don't have to file a claim just to, understand
Sure.
what's going to happen. So,
Yeah. Well, and in our business too, I mean, there's a lot of times where you need a certificate of insurance in order to be on site of the property. And
yep.
it's nice to just text that and have it go to the
Yeah.
property manager or whomever it needs to go to at that point. That's really important. There's a lot of business resources out there that I think photographers in general tend to be ignorant of, and they're usually always free.
Hmm.
So, and the networking is certainly a really valuable part of that. So, as far as marketing, what kinds of things do you do on an ongoing basis to bring new clients in or keep existing ones?
Yeah, I would say the biggest investment has been developing a website that gets found on
Okay.
Google and with SEO.
Hmm.
And that is one thing I've done myself, instead of hiring out or delegating to somebody else,
Hmm.
just because websites can cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
And,
And they may
I
or
don't
may not be
necessarily have a lot of
working.
money. Yeah. So, especially in the early career, um, just figuring out how to do that, figuring out what you're looking at and what
Yeah.
works for you, what kind of website you want to build. Again, from the networking side, I met a guy who does website development and SEO, and he wrote a book called The
Mm.
Holistic Guide to Online Marketing. And so I read that book cover to back and used all the tips that he had in there. and it helped. Now I'm ranked on first page of Google for, commercial photography, Madison, Wisconsin, architectural photography, time-lapse
Nice.
photography, all these things now
Hmm.
front page. So, I get a handful of inquiries every month just from that.
Yeah,
So that's been great.
that's
Um,
huge.
yeah, obviously AIAP is awesome. That website, I've gotten found through there. I've got
Hmm.
clients that I work with now on a regular basis who found me there. So appreciate that resource and highly recommend
Sure.
everybody, get listed and join
Hmm.
and be a part of the organization. And also LinkedIn, I think, is a really fantastic community for
Absolutely. Yeah.
connecting, getting your work in front of people where it matters, where it's going to
Hmm.
get seen and appreciated. I'm on Instagram as well, and that's another platform I like, just to see photography and to
Yeah.
get creative vision. But I wouldn't say that I get any work through there, nor do people really seem to care or connect.
No,
Uh,
I agree 100% with that. LinkedIn is the is the best tool for commercial photographers,
yeah,
um, as far as social media goes. Anyway,
yeah.
um, yeah,
And
and
if
there,
you like doing your research, you can go to a company page and then just go to their people and then find the person who's listed as the marketing director or the business development person or their communications person. Just connect with everybody. And sometimes they won't connect, sometimes they will. And then that
yeah,
just opens the door. Don't sell them right away. Don't be that kind of person, but
right,
just
yeah, just
send them
make
a
that
message and say,
connection.
hey, I love what you guys do. This is an awesome, awesome project that I see is getting worked on. Like,
Hmm.
kudos, keep up the good work. Just get in front of them.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and I'm glad you brought that up. That just the attitude of making connections with people without trying to sell them something. Um, I'm doing work next week for a lighting manufacturer that I contacted on LinkedIn just with a little connection note that said, I'm available. I really think your projects are amazing. I'd love to be involved. If at some point in the future that works, let me know. Well, now they've been a regular client for a number of years, and I've been able to photograph some really amazing properties as a result. And all it was just a simple little LinkedIn message, and I didn't say, you know, hire me right now,
Yeah.
or you need me, like the ones that we all get on LinkedIn. Um, but yeah, as a research tool, it's huge, and there are some plugins that you can get, um, which I won't mention because LinkedIn doesn't like them. But there are some browser plugins that will allow you to extract email addresses and things like that
Yeah, definitely.
from
Yeah, I
LinkedIn and build
use
your email list for direct email if you choose to do that.
Yeah, and I think maybe those same plugins can work on like company websites and stuff too. I
Yes.
know that there's a couple that I use, where if I'm perusing their site and they don't have a person's website listed or
Yeah.
an email listed,
Hmm.
you can click into there and it'll scour and sometimes find it or at least give you the format of their company email so you can just kind of
Yeah.
guess what that person's email is going to be.
Yeah. You've cracked that code. Exactly. Yeah. We all
Yeah.
do that. I mean,
Yeah.
do you do direct email at all? Is that part of your marketing plan?
Yeah, I do not a ton of like cold emailing,
Hmm.
but enough. Every quarter I'm trying to find new folks that I'd like to work with and just,
Hmm.
who's doing cool projects or who's doing good work. And then just send them an email. And, I've got some templates that I've saved that get changed out just depending on how I feel about
Yeah.
their response. If some are never getting opened, then I'll change it up a little bit. I'll try to make it a little different, maybe
Hmm.
shorter, maybe more directly, you know, given to them in terms of
Hmm.
language and projects and stuff like that. But um, yeah, I would say the percentage of clients gained from cold emailing is pretty low.
Hmm.
But there's been successes from it for sure. A good handful of clients that I've gotten
Hmm.
just from doing that. So
Yeah, I would say the same. It's not where the bulk of my new business comes from, but it's enough new business that I continue to do it. So
yeah.
it's certainly well worthwhile. Um, Talk to me just a little bit about your working process as far as when you license image to a client or to multiple clients and things like that. Is the licensing um, equation, is that a big part of your initial bid, or just where are you on that, and how do you explain that to people?
Yeah, for sure. So this is something that has changed a lot in my, 10 years of doing this professionally.
Hmm.
When I first started in commercial photography, I didn't really know what licensing and usage was.
Hmm.
And then, a number of years ago, probably 7 years ago at this point, I found the F-stoppers tutorial, Monty Isom, and making
Yeah,
real
sure.
money with commercial photography. And that blew my mind. It just exploded it all over the room. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. He goes into licensing and usage, and they go
Yeah.
they go over invoices, and he's talking with art directors and creative people. And um, from there, it changed my entire business model, and I got a licensing agreement and just started, understanding more about intellectual property and copyright ownership and all that kind of stuff. And since then, I've been a big advocate for it because as
Mm-hmm.
people who create intellectual property for advertising use, there's value to that. There's value in the creation of it, and there's value in the usage of it. So that's been something that I've put into place in my business, is in many places as I can. And it's a topic of conversation for every new client. And it's sometimes you feel like you're walking a tightrope in order to you want to make
Oh
the
yeah.
client relationship good. You don't want to make them mad. You want to make them understand the value and still pay for what it is that you're
Hmm.
asking them to pay for. And um, you know, a way that I've gone about it, because my initial licensing agreement included pretty much everything for my contracting client. So they would
Okay.
get full usage rights in
Hmm.
perpetuity, all advertising and marketing
Hmm.
nationwide. And then, I had been increasing prices year after year. And
Yeah.
then I thought, well, like I'm doing fine on that, but I don't necessarily want to up my prices right now because I feel like I'm maybe at the
Mm.
limit of who I'm working with. And so instead of changing my price, I just cut out the advertising and editorial portion
Okay.
of my
Yeah.
license. And so I took
Yeah.
away a
Good
thing, which
move.
is still basically adding value.
Hmm.
Um, and nobody cared. Like the clients who I had, I
Yeah.
just reached out to them and I said, hey, the majority of folks that I'm working with aren't using this part of the license.
Yeah.
And I don't want to increase costs. So this is kind of a way that I'm looking at doing that, where if the need comes and you want to be able to use it in paid advertising, or if you have editorial pieces that you want to show, just let me know and we can license,
Hmm.
individual use cases for that, and it'll be cheaper. And I don't want to have to charge more for this kind of thing if you're not even going to use it.
Yeah.
And everybody was very responsive to it. And now when I get new clients, I send them my licensing agreement right away on the first
Hmm.
email and just say, hey, just check this out, read the language, let me know if there's any terms and conditions that you're uncomfortable with, and we can jump on a call and just talk through stuff. And I can let you know where I'm coming from, what my experience has been, and why this is the way I work, and
Yeah.
why it's better for you too. And then
Hmm.
they're usually pretty good about it. I've had some people, mostly local developers, who have reached out, and I give them a quote and I send them this and we talk about it. And then they just flip shit. They're like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not going to own the images. Like, I don't have the copyright. Like, no, sir, that's not how this works. I'm like, let me just give you a little bit
Yeah.
more information. And they say, we're not a huge national company. We're not doing this and that. And I'm like, that's fine. If you can't respect the fact that I own the work that I create, well, then I'm not the
Hmm.
right person for you. That's okay. There's plenty
Yeah.
of other photographers to work with. Go work with
Yeah.
them.
That's mm. I run into that every day myself.
Yeah.
I've been doing this a long time, and it still kind of stings a little bit, but it's usually in a small local market where you
Yeah.
encounter that. I never ever have a problem when I'm working with a national client.
Yeah.
Um, in fact, they sometimes think that my licensing terms are rather liberal, so
Yeah.
they're pretty good with that. And occasionally, I do work with ad agencies, and I don't think anybody even reads it. It's just it needs to get done. The client will approve the price, and anyway, yeah. But the
Yeah.
local, it's still an educational process, and in your community, if you're like me, I still continue to try to educate with things I post, and sometimes I feel like it's a losing battle. But
Yeah.
once you make that commitment to, protect your copyright, you can't really turn back from that.
Yeah, really. And to respect the folks who came before us and
Hmm.
who, built this industry of photography and what it means in commercial, you shouldn't just let that stuff go. Like that's
No.
value that's been fought for, and it's
Mhm.
understood. And only up until recently has anything really changed on that. you know,
Yeah.
late aughts and moving into the digital era, kind of things changed from
Hmm.
what I heard, at least from the photographers who I assisted with, who have been
Yeah.
around for 30
Hmm.
or 40 years working. Um, you know, and so it's like you want to try to hang on to that value. You don't want to let that kind of stuff go, because then it just becomes a race to the bottom, and you don't control what happens with your creative works. Like
Yeah.
you know, even as a musician, like if you're writing music and then all of a sudden the publisher owns your music or your label owns your music, you don't have
Yeah.
control over that anymore.
Exactly.
You don't get to monetize that. You don't have access to where it goes. I mean, there's been so many jobs that I've lost just because I won't give them what they want for free,
Hmm.
or they don't understand. And it's national firms. Like there was a job last year where they wanted me to go do some exteriors of a barn,
Hmm.
that had some new, you know, printing style on it, and it was for a
Okay.
metal fabrication company. You know, I think they're like a top 500 or 100 company, you know, one
Wow.
of the biggest steel producers in America.
Mm.
And I told him what the licensing was going to be for it, and he said, "Oh, yeah, we can't do that. It's, you know, they want something into like the 2 to 4 grand range." I'm like, "For national advertising, and they want the full rights for everything."
Oh my
And I said,
gosh.
"There's no way I'm doing that. Like that, the value's so much higher than that." And he said,
Yeah.
"All right, we'll find somebody else." I said, "That's fair. Go find somebody else, then. It's not gonna be me." You know, like my
Yeah.
work is what it is, and I work to be the best that I can be. And I'm certainly not about to give it to you for free when you make, you know, $1 billion a year and you're not willing to pay me, you
Yeah.
know, what it's worth.
Yeah. And I think new photographers, their knee jerk is, I don't want to lose that income, and I'll do
Yeah.
whatever it takes to get that. But at a certain point, you just gotta just stick with it, and I think it does serve you better in the end if you make that commitment. But yeah, we all deal with that on a fairly regular basis. I had a hospital this morning that I'm dealing with that I photographed for a construction company, and now the hospital wants me just to give them a set of images, and they wanted free access was the wording they used. And so my email back was, "Does that give me free access to healthcare too?"
Yeah, right.
No.
I'll do a straight up trade, a whole year of free
Yeah,
healthcare, and you can have
I'd
these
be I'd
images.
be good with that. Um,
Yeah.
so that's interesting. Um, so when you're putting together a pricing model for somebody, and what factors do you figure in, or do you line item everything, or do you put everything in a single fee, or what does that look like when a client comes to you and just wants a price for a project?
Sure. So my approach to pricing is basically production time,
Hmm.
retouching per image, and then any possible extra licensing fees.
Okay.
Obviously, expenses and everything else go into it as well. Most local shoots don't really have any expenses. There's not
Yeah.
really parking fees or tolls around where I am.
Hmm.
You know, if we travel, that all gets covered. Normally my clients are buying me meals when we're on
Hmm.
production. So if it's a full day, you know, that just gets covered by them. And if it doesn't, that gets to be a line item added.
Okay.
But yeah, I do break everything down. You know, most new clients I'll send a proposal to that gives a job description on what we're doing, what they can expect in terms of delivery and
Mm.
files, and you know, the client provisions that they need to provide in terms of site access or
Great.
propping items or models, you know, just
Mm.
kind of spelling everything out of what that looks like. You know, the second page then is basically an itemized estimate that
Hmm.
shows, you know, here's our production. This is what we're going to be. If I have an assistant, that'll get added in.
Okay.
You know, their estimate number of images that they want at the cost per image. And then the licensing is included with that
Hmm.
for the standard client publications, which, you know, doesn't include the paid advertising or editorial. So
Okay.
that's the basic structure. You know, many clients now will come to me and say, "Hey, you know, we've got 2 other partners that want to cost share on it."
Hmm.
And you know, I think it's pretty standard to do just like a 30% add-on
Hmm.
for, you know, the entire shoot. I don't necessarily always add 30% onto the expenses. It's
Hmm.
usually just the portion that it took to produce the shoot, which does also include my assistant.
Yeah.
So that'll get added on, and then the entire cost gets divided, you know, evenly.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like what most people that I know in the country are doing these days, and pretty good business practices. Do you require a deposit from anybody when you first do a shoot, or for new client or anything like that?
Yeah, I used to not, and I don't for everybody.
Hmm.
But depending on what the shoot is, if it's going to be a bigger shoot, if it's a new client, I definitely require 50%
Okay.
advance payment. I don't say it as a deposit or a retainer because
Yeah.
I don't want them to think like, oh, well, if we don't do it, you're going to give us the money back because that's not what it means. It means you're going to pay me to hold the date, and then this is what it is. And
Yeah.
if you cancel, well, in my terms and conditions that you sign with the estimate,
Hmm.
it says that, basically you're going to owe 50% of the entire budget anyways. So you've already given me that. So I'm not going to refund that to you
Hmm.
if you wasted my time or if you cancel right before. Um, but yeah,
Yeah. And that happens occasionally that you have to
yeah,
enforce that, but my experience has been it's not very often. Equipment wise, where are you right now as far as what you're working with, cameras and lighting and things like that? Can you kind of give us an
yeah,
idea of what it is that you
sure.
use to make it work?
Yeah, I'll start with the caveat that pretty much any camera system that's out right now is perfect for what you need, I mean,
Yeah.
starting from a Nikon D60 back in the
Yeah.
day to where we are now, everything is awesome. But
Hmm.
I shoot with a Nikon Z8,
Okay.
which is amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and I have three shift lenses, a 24, a
Hmm.
15, which is the Laowa,
Oh
which is
yeah. Yeah.
awesome. And then an old Nikkor 35 shift from the 70s
I still have
that
one of
I
those. I love that lens.
yeah, I found it on eBay for like $170. The
Yeah.
pictures looked super clean. I was like, oh, I'm gonna take a chance on it. And it came to my door and it's just beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
It works great. I mean, there's a little more chromatic aberration than with newer
Yeah.
lenses, but I
Hmm.
mean, you can fix that stuff so easy now that like
Hmm.
it's really not an issue. Um,
It's such a
so
nice length to have. Um,
yeah,
and there's just really nothing else out there that does as good a job. So yeah, I've had one
yeah,
of those. In fact, I've had two of them, but my second one is a little newer than the first one. But I love, yeah, it's a good
sure.
lens.
Yeah. I
Um,
wish Nikon was better with their teleconverters.
mm,
Like none of them that I've tested work with anything other than a telephoto lens, like a 70 to 200. Just the way to connect it doesn't match,
okay.
which is kind of frustrating. So if anybody out there knows how to, get a teleconverter for a Nikon and Nikkor lenses, boy, I'd love to hear.
Mm, interesting. Um, yeah, I actually was using that Nikkor lens on my Canon system
Oh
um,
yeah,
with an adapter. Yeah, the Nikon to Canon adapter is a really good adapter, and so I use that on Canon cameras, and I've since I'm gone to a Fuji medium format now, but I still use the Canons occasionally. But yeah, that was a great focal length. Lighting wise, do you use a lot of lights, few lights, or what's your
um,
approach?
I used to use more than I do now. I've kind of refined my approach in terms of just how I want productions to go,
Hmm.
and how much blending I want to do after the fact.
Yeah.
So yeah, right now it's my approach is figure out what the space needs and then just add
Hmm.
what's necessary or subtract what's necessary. I mean, there's photographers out there who do some really stylized lighting, which I love.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get a little more into that just to be able to add some pizzazz and commercial sparkle when
Hmm.
when you want that. But yeah, mostly now it's just, when I'm on production, I bring two lights with me, and
Hmm.
a stand case. And then I just use those. And a lot of what I do is subtractive lighting, just
Yeah.
setting up big, black sheets that will block stuff or block reflections or give me a little more even lighting of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think that's huge. There's a lot of, well, most photographers don't think in those terms about what can I take out rather than what can I add.
Yeah.
And so, and have you ever done any film work as far as film production or those kinds of things? Because that's a skill that those guys really have. And
Yeah.
it just seems people that I see do that now as for architectural photographers generally have had some exposure to the film industry and the way, you know, um, a DP or somebody would approach a scene. So that's
Yeah.
interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah, I haven't used film in the commercial realm.
Hmm.
I mean, like I said before, in high school I shot on film for a while, and then following graduation I kept that film camera for a little while.
Okay.
So that stays in my mind. I think having that as being the initial upbringing into
Hmm.
photography and creating imageries, trying to get it right in camera.
Yeah.
Um, that's always there. And then Photoshop was just so much fun at the beginning that I tried to figure out what the heck can I do to make something awesome, and learning
Yeah.
blending modes and learning, all that different kind of stuff was great. And then, I feel like most people when you learn a new tool or you learn a new skill set, you overuse it, you go way
Mhm.
far, and then you bring that pendulum back a little bit. And so
Yeah.
when I was getting into lighting, when I was doing all these things, man, I would pop lights everywhere, and I would, light paint all sorts of stuff and then blend it all in. I'm like, man, I'm spending a half a day on one image. Like this,
Exactly.
this
Yeah.
is not sustainable. I'm not charging
Yeah.
enough for this, nor would my clients want to pay for this much. Like they want it to look nice, but I need to streamline my process, and maybe I can do that without adding quite so much, blending work and
Yeah. I
everything
think
like
that's
that. So
important. Yeah. How much time do you spend after the fact on post production? Is it substantial, or have you streamlined that as well?
I would say probably averages about an hour per image.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes that's, it can be 15 minutes if it's, a simple
Hmm.
shot, a detail shot. Other things, if we're shooting like a wide lobby area, like damn, that might take 2 or 3 hours. Like there's
Hmm.
some shots where, especially I like to do like stitched panoramas from the
Yeah.
shift.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of like top and bottom shifting.
I do too.
So at that point, you're stitching together two shots for every exposure, and then I'm using a
Hmm.
minimum of three exposures to blend. So now, I've got six images that blend together, and then we're trying to put all that together. So that can add a little bit of extra time, and then
Yeah.
yeah, as soon as you gotta, make pen selections around stuff, if that's a
Hmm.
complicated scene, that can be really difficult. And, I've tried to be smarter in terms of using like color range selectors to help minimize
Oh, okay.
coloring. And,
Hmm.
I use luminosity masking and frequency separation on
Hmm.
nearly every image that I edit. And I think,
A lot of
um,
time saved there if you do that. Yeah.
yeah, and those are just like, actions that I just click on the
Yeah.
keyboard, and it
Mhm.
makes it happen for me, and then I can just use those layers and get it going. But yeah, that helps blend stuff more seamlessly and make things look a lot nicer. And frequency separation is so great in terms of
Yeah.
fixing detail that maybe you lost in any highlights, or smoothing out
Right.
colors, between surfaces or anything like that. Just gives you so much more control.
Hmm. Yeah. It's not huge when you see the finished image, unless you see one that hasn't been worked on,
Yeah.
and then you see
Yeah.
that it's a huge difference. So yeah, that's great. Do you ever send anything out? Do you have any third parties that do production for you at all?
Um, in terms of production, no.
Post
I mean, I've
production
got
or
contractors who come with me, that will help. In terms of post production, for architecture, no, I pretty much do everything on
okay.
my own, and I've considered trying to work with other people. I've had a handful of folks reach out over the last couple of years,
Yeah.
saying like, "Hey, I'm a retoucher. I love your work, and would be fun to work with you." And I always have the best intentions of saying like, yeah, let's try to do something, and then, the ability to delegate that and send it off. And if you have to do markups, or if it's just it's easier for me to just keep it in my brain and just do it,
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I can agree with that. The only time I've done that is when I've had uh a massive number of images that needed basically the same correction, or
yeah,
the same things taking out. I've done big projects where I've sent it to somebody else to take out all the exit signs, or all the trash cans, or all the
yeah,
smoke
for sure.
detectors, those kinds of things that are just kind of tedious, but really don't have an aesthetic bearing. But just need to get done, and I can spend my time elsewhere. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good.
And
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, since generative fill has come out in Photoshop,
Yeah,
that's my main use now to get rid of exit signs and all of that kind of crazy stuff that would be complex cloning. Sometimes it's
yeah,
incredibly complex, and generative fill does an absolutely amazing job. I mean, it doesn't always blend perfectly well. Sometimes you got to feather out your selection a little bit. Sometimes you got
Yeah.
to add a little noise, or, again, compositing,
Hmm.
just making the layers match and making it feel like it's part of the scene. But wow, that's come a long way. That's
But
a
yeah,
wonderful
it can
tool to
get you in
have.
the ballpark really fast, and to
Yeah.
me that's huge. But yeah, that I wish that exit signs didn't have to be green and
Yeah.
all
Or
those other
bright
things.
red and they just splash the
Yeah,
color everywhere. It's
it's
like,
that big
ugh.
color spread that you just yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
those little things that bother only architectural photographers. But as far as your clientele, architecture, is it architects or interior designers or construction companies? Where do you see most of your work coming from?
Yeah, in terms of architecture, I would say it's probably a pretty even split between architects and construction companies.
Okay.
Uh, I do a bit of work with developers and construction companies for
Hmm.
drone.
Okay.
And a lot of that will be like construction progress, where I'm out every
Oh
month
yeah.
just on a site, just doing a flight, capturing photos or videos for them.
Hmm.
But yeah, in terms of like project photography, I would say those are the two clientele that I get that pay my pricing and like my work. I've had a ton of interior designers and like home remodelers and smaller folks reach out to me, and I
Hmm.
try to accommodate in terms of pricing and what I'm offering, and
Hmm.
I never get those jobs. I'm just always out of price. As soon as you limit licensing, or as soon as you say like, oh, it's going to be 2 grand or whatever for a half
Hmm.
day and some photos, and they're like, can't, nope,
Yeah.
not going to do that. I was hoping for under 1,000. Like, all right, there's people out there that you can work with that'll do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they
They're
probably
they're
don't
going
take
to
the same
find
amount of,
someone. It's just not you.
yeah. Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. But at
No.
least if they have to refer somebody to a high-end architectural photographer, your name's the one they're going to remember. So that's a good
Yeah.
thing as well. You mentioned that you do a lot of drone work and video. And can you kind of give us an idea what that's like as far as your work mix and how much of
Yeah.
that you're doing?
Yeah. I would say anywhere from, 25 to 40% of my work is probably in the drone or the video realm.
Okay.
And over the last 2 years, like doing produced video work has taken a big uptick.
Mm.
I've had some training in video. Like basically when I started my company, I was also working with my friend's commercial video company,
Oh,
and
okay.
they taught me a bunch in terms of camera movement and codecs and editing and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So that was really nice. And then I've just kind of taken that knowledge and applied my architectural thinking and
Hmm.
visual um, composition
Yeah.
into the realm of video. And it's been good, just trying to tell stories in a different way.
Hmm.
Doing interviews with people, that's been really fun too, because
Yeah.
I've taken on the role of director and
Yeah.
interviewer. And so like I get to be more involved in to telling the story and understanding and just devising questions that might bring things out that might not have otherwise gotten brought out.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. That's a huge point, and such a great add-on for an architectural photographer, because I think architectural photographers like yourself, they tend to understand a project in a way that just somebody coming in with a video camera is not going to really understand. And so the fact that you say that you direct those interviews, and that doesn't surprise me, because
yeah.
you'd be the one that would be able to ask the intelligent questions and really get to the story of what that building is about, or that project or whatever. So
Yeah. And no one else is going to have a better holistic view of the end
yeah.
product than
Hmm.
me, right? In terms
Yeah.
of like, what do we need for editing? What is the final piece supposed to look like? What's our message that we want to say?
Hmm.
And so if I'm the one asking the questions and they give me an answer and I say, hey, I'm thinking in my mind that's really close to what I want. Let's push a little bit farther into that so I can try to get the soundbite that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
If my client is interviewing them, they might not even have that consideration.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I've done shoots in the past where it's like panel discussions, and I'm not the one who is directing that conversation, and they're talking over each other, and it's like, well, that was a great soundbite, but I can't cut that out because there's three
Yeah,
other people
exactly.
all laughing and talking together. Like
Yeah.
that in its isolation is going to sound weird. So being able to have that kind of control is really nice in terms of
Mm.
telling the story better.
That's great. Yeah. And you do your own editing as far as the video goes?
I have been. The company that I worked with back in the day,
Hmm.
which I mentioned was my friend's company, that's still going. There was two partners that started that together. One of them has separated, and he started a different company that he was working on for a while. And unfortunately, that company had to close last year just due to some personnel issues
Wow.
and just not being sustainable for what it
Mm.
was. And he's gotten back into video work, and so now he's my main video editor. He's
Okay.
pretty much on every project with me in terms of video, second shooting.
Nice.
And so he's got a good idea of what the project is. You know, he and I always discuss over what we're going to do and what the plan for the editing is.
Hmm.
And then he'll put together a rough draft. He'll cut a story together for me based on my direction, sends
Nice.
that over, and then we talk after, and I give him more direction on, hey, I like what you're doing, but this isn't exactly right. This is a little bit fluff, or we need to cut
Mm.
this out, or I don't like what they're saying here. And we just go back and forth and kind of, sometimes it's a heated debate because he likes the things and I don't like it. And it's like, well, try to sell me on it, but I'm a hard sell. So
Yeah. Yeah. You got to know where to not give anymore. But that's, yeah, I think that what you're describing is really important for somebody that might be listening to this and considering going in that direction, because that skill set, I think, goes often unused in architectural photographers. So I feel
yeah.
good having you tell me about that. Where do you see things going in the next few years for you, business wise? More of the same,
Yeah.
or are you going to focus any different direction?
I'm kind of hoping for more of the same. I mean, the
Hmm.
last year or two have been really great in terms of, you know, building forward in terms of my
Hmm.
marketing and what I'm shooting and how I'm using that as a snowballing effect in my marketing to gain bigger clients. And so that's what I'm hoping will continue.
Hmm.
Obviously, I'd love to continue expanding into video as well as photography and just having a suite of services that I can offer
Yeah.
these niche down clients of what I'm looking for. And it seems like that's what they're looking for too. They love having somebody who they
Yeah.
can consult with these kinds of things, who they can trust, has their best interest in mind in terms of producing the best quality imagery and video that they can, who understands all those facets and all the pre-production stuff that's going to be involved with that.
Hmm.
I'm always a little concerned on where's the market going? What is our technology doing to the work that we create in terms of
Hmm.
AI and new stuff like that?
Yeah.
It's a little unnerving because you never really know what's going to happen. I mean, consider the
Yeah.
fact that like phones just keep getting better and better,
Hmm.
and AI editing is just going to get better and better. I'm sure there's going to be a portion of us that get disrupted. That just we're not going to have a job if we don't find a way to work within that, And I think
Yeah.
architecture isn't the fastest moving front of the line
No.
technological change. They
No.
they it seems like it's a little bit slow. Even introducing video seems a little
Hmm.
slow for some folks.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily worried about that. Whereas in terms of, commercial work for agencies, like they might just
Hmm.
not even hire photographers. If they can just take concepts and just create it out
Yeah.
of AI and they can take a picture of the product with their phone and then have it get brought in and they can do color correcting and just type a prompt into whatever image generation thing they're doing. And I mean, that'll be the first spot I think where much of the work gets displaced, but we'll see. I mean, there's people that are talking about like, what's the value? Like, is
Sure.
human made going to be like a stamp of approval? Well, like this is handcrafted, not
Hmm.
AI crafted. I'm not really sure.
Well, yeah, I've had some conversations recently with people in other industries about
Okay.
this, most especially advertising and things like that. And the takeaway for me is that photographers, good photographers, are still going to be hired for the way that they see things.
Yeah.
It's not about the technology that they use to create that image or how that image gets created. It's the vision that they have, that they bring to the table, and so, we pivot because of the technology on a fairly regular basis, it seems like these days. But
Yeah.
being able to bring that artistic vision is something that I still think is going to always have value, and may continue to, may have more value because, well, at least what I see as far, industries, especially the photography industry, that the level of professionalism tends to be decreasing fairly rapidly across the board, in certain disciplines more than others. And so those that do it really well, I think, are going to be rewarded really well on an ongoing basis. So
Yeah. And like you said before, you know, with creative people, pushing into inspiration and trying to be more creative and creating art, I mean, it's a collaborative process. So it's not like fine art where you can just create whatever you want. But, if you're just there to press the button, if your client is always the one that's determining your composition and, you're not having any say on that, you're not as valuable of a piece,
no,
you're basically just a technician at that point instead of a creative
exactly.
human that's kind of pushing forward a vision.
Yeah. And that's an excellent way to put that. That's why I don't have an iPad on set when I for my clients.
Interesting. Okay.
They don't approve. I do. So that's
See, and for me, I do have an iPad and it's a collaborative process. But almost everything I do is some sort of selling or negotiation. And I'll even show you this. This is a book that I've read and am rereading. Just in terms of understanding more communication and negotiating and trying to deliver the message you're actually trying to have delivered, because perception is a crazy thing. I could be saying something to you and you're not hearing what I think I'm telling you.
Exactly.
So if I'm on set with somebody and we're making something collaboratively, I want to make sure obviously it works for their marketing, so they need to be able to sign off on it, in my opinion. But if they say, oh, well, I'd rather have this, or can we include this? That's where I'm going to say, well, this is why I'm not doing that. And these are the reasons why. And if we back out and shoot something like this, you're going to lose this. We're going to maybe have to go wider, and then everything's going to get distorted. And so at that point, it gives me an opportunity to show them I'm the expert. And then that builds even more trust. And then they go, oh, okay. Well, let's Kyle roll with this and let's see what we get. And they're always happy with it.
Yeah, that's the important point, is that you've got a reason for what you're doing. I mean, it's not just a random place that you stuck your camera. There's a real reason why you are where you are, and with the lens that you have and the composition that you have. So, as clients get to know us better, they trust us more on things like that. And it's an ongoing process, I think, and we both learn from it. And the oldest and best clients I have don't even show up anymore. So that, to me, that's a huge vote of trust for me, because they give us the project and I do it and we're done.
Yeah,
so
absolutely,
it works out fine. Kyle, it's been a pleasure talking with you. You've given us some really good insights here, and even though you don't have white hair, you're a very wise man. And
thank you. Appreciate that.
I mentioned, before we went on with this podcast, I mentioned we wanted to have somebody on that didn't have white hair. And I just feel like the art industry of architectural photographers is kind of aging out of the business. And so it's just really refreshing to see somebody with your talent and drive and success in this business. And I wish you all the best. And again, thanks for coming on and sharing this time with us.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate all of that. If anybody would like to connect, shoot me an email. It's contact@crimsonsunstudios.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to chat with people. Anytime photographers can help each other out, I think is a great opportunity. We can all learn from each other. And that's one of the things I love about these podcasts that you've been putting out, and the group discussions and the individual series, and all of the gear kind of stuff that you've been putting focus on is great. So please keep doing what you're doing, and I'll keep tuning in. And this is an awesome community to be a part of. So
thanks, Kyle. I'll put your information in the description of this, and on the podcast and the video, and we'll look forward to you again at a future meeting.
All right.
Thank you very much.
This has been another episode of A Photographer's Life. If you've enjoyed this program, please let us know by liking this episode and subscribing to this channel. A Photographer's Life is brought to you by the Association of Independent Architectural Photographers. This episode is copyrighted, and may not be used in full or in part, without the written permission of the AIAP. Please join us again soon for another inside look at the world of professional architectural photography.